we are not listening to the people we claim to represent. We claim to be the party of the working class, the party of poor people. And yet we let interest groups and think tanks tell us what those people need. That's why we end up with these relatively small ball solutions. I'm not saying they don't matter, but more roads and bridges, bulk negotiation of prescription drug prices, a little bit bigger tax credit for families with kids, that's not meeting the moment.
That was Democratic Senator Chris Murphy essentially admitting that the Democratic Party is completely out of touch with its own base. And after Trump's victory, it seems like he's one of a few politicians who's actually trying to be introspective in order to genuinely figure out where the party went wrong. Now, he also made some pretty shocking confessions on Twitter that basically validates everything that Bernie Sanders and a lot of us have been saying for a while now. First, he says the left, he's referring to the Democratic Party, which is not left, but nonetheless, he says the left has never fully grappled with the wreckage of 50 years of neoliberalism. He adds, and when progressives like Bernie Sanders aggressively go after the elites that hold people down, they are shunned as dangerous populists. Why? Maybe because true economic populism is bad for our high-income base. Wow. I've got to say, I am genuinely shocked to see a sitting Democratic Party senator admit this about the party. I mean, we all know it's true, but to see them admit it is quite the thing to behold. And of course, he's exactly right. Democrats shun their working class base because they think that those high income supporters are going to be the ones to carry them. They're going to help them get elected by sending in more donations. But that's not true. Bernie Sanders already proved that you don't need millionaires and billionaires to run campaigns. If you look at this individual donor map from 2020, courtesy of the New York Times, you could see that Bernie Sanders was able to raise millions of dollars with just small dollar donations from working class people across the country. We're talking red states, blue states. It didn't matter because he tapped into something that other Democrats couldn't. Genuine grassroots enthusiasm. He didn't have to send 10 texts a day begging people for money, talking about the threat of Trump. People willingly gave him $5 here, $10 there, because they felt like it was an investment into their future. My mom, for example, she never voted her entire life until Bernie ran in 2016, and she called me up to ask how she can donate to Bernie Sanders, even though she couldn't afford it because she was on a fixed income. And I told her, Mom, just let me donate $5 or $10 in your place. And she's like, no, I want to be a part of this. This was something that was real, that never happened before. She was converting 2016 Trump voters to 2020 Bernie voters by explaining the benefits of Medicare for all to them. The enthusiasm across the country was palpable. And all of that evaporated like this with Bernie Sanders' campaign. And a lot of Bernie Sanders' support, they're no longer with the Democratic Party. A lot of his support came from younger millennial voters, people from my generation, whose world was shaped by so many failures of neoliberalism and capitalism. Look at this graph. So millennials in the United States and the UK are bucking the trend of becoming more conservative with age. In fact, they're becoming increasingly left-leaning, and the Democratic Party has not addressed this. Every election cycle, the Democratic Party leaves millions of millennial votes on the table and doesn't even try to craft a message to cater to them like Bernie did, with a few exceptions here and there. Instead, they try to win over moderate Republicans and tell us to shut the fuck up whenever we ask for too much. But this issue stems from the Democratic Party's reliance on elites who are fundamentally at odds with what its own base wants. And that's the crux of the issue here. And after 10 years of us trying to tell Democrats this, they're finally starting to wake up and get it. Or at least they're not playing dumb anymore. But there's more from Chris Murphy.
Democrats need to understand that Republicans start by examining the way that people are actually feeling and then matching policies to the way that they're feeling. Democrats need to start doing the same thing. If we did that, we would pick bigger fights. We would be a more populist party. We would name the corporations and the billionaires that are screwing people, and we would take it to them. Now, that's something that the Harris campaign did not do. And frankly, when leaders in our party like Bernie Sanders do it, they largely get shamed or shunned as dangerous populists. Maybe that's because if we actually were fighting billionaires, if we were actually engaging in true populist economic ideas, it would hurt our coalition. which these days tends to be higher income people who don't want the status quo fundamentally upset. So for me, those issues of true economic populism, moving power from people that have it to people that don't have it, that has to be the tentpole of our coalition.
That is quite the admission. The Democratic Party has failed to win back working class voters because they've constructed this big tent that's so big that it's lost all ideological coherency. It includes anti-imperialists and neocons, conservatives and social democrats, elites and working class people. That is not a coalition that can remain intact for very long. And that's not to say that you can't have disagreement within the party, but you're building a coalition that's doomed to fail because it's based on nothing. It's based on opposition to Donald Trump, but there's no real momentum for something. Voting against something isn't always going to work. In fact, it's failed twice, right? It's doomed to fail because what some people want in that big tent is fundamentally at odds with what others want. And I think that Maurice Mitchell of the Working Families Party put it best.
I think that contradiction is one of the fundamental problems inside of the tent of the Democratic Party. The fact that Mark Cuban and AOC and Bernie Sanders can live inside of the same tent. You can't live inside of that tent comfortably. And so I think what he's articulating is an inconsistency and a contradiction that everyday working people can see. I agree. Like, I'm glad that you brought up the fact that in the very beginning, VP Harris was running with a populist message. We tested those messages independently as the Working Families Party, and we demonstrated that everyday working people, they're not necessarily captured by one party or another, but they're looking for people who are willing to every single day fight for them and fight against the forces that are rigging the economy and society against them and actually name them. So when she rolled out a policy that was coming after the price gouging corporations, folks at the Working Families Party, we were excited. And then when those messages kind of got submerged, we got concerned. We published our own independent message, pro-Harris message that spoke about economic populism. And it actually independently, it scored through the roof. And as a result, the independent vehicle of the campaign actually put money behind it. That demonstrates to us that there is something real about speaking very clearly about who you're fighting with and who you're fighting for. A Democratic Party that is chummy with billionaires, but then trying to argue that it's in the interest of unions, I think it doesn't pass the smell test for a lot of working people, which is why we build independent politics at the Working Families Party.
It just doesn't pass the smell test. That's my feelings exactly. And the fact that Chris Murphy is finally realizing this and speaking to it is a pretty big deal. The problem, however, is that it might be too little too late. And I say this because the party at this point has no credibility whatsoever. At best, we expect them to find a better actor who can LARP as a populist, pretend to be better on working class issues. But none of us actually expect a new leader, should one emerge, to be ideologically driven. Or if they are ideologically driven, be bold enough to actually fight the billionaire class. And you might say that that's too cynical, but Chris Murphy, he can prove me wrong right now. See, he doesn't support Medicare for all, something the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party's base wants. If he signed his name on that tomorrow, I would think that he's actually serious about listening to the base. If he called for an arms embargo on Israel and told Biden to actually do what he said he would do before the election and institute an arms embargo, I would think they're serious. Don't tell us. Show us. I'm just so sick of the talk. I want action. Pick a fight with your donors right now, Chris. Shun the health insurance industry. Shun your defense contractor donors. You won't do it because even though you now know what you need to do, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the spine to do it. And in other countries, you see, what happens after a blowout is the party leaders that lost step down after getting repudiated in the election. But the same Democratic Party leaders aren't going anywhere. Does anybody expect Chuck Schumer to resign? Does anybody expect Hakeem Jeffries to do the same? Of course not. The same people who got us here, who hold hands with Christo-fascists, aren't going anywhere. They're still going to lead the party into irrelevance. And if you think that I'm being hyperbolic when I say they're holding hands with Christo-fascists, well, see Exhibit A.
We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel.
That right there is exactly what the base wants. Thank you so much. I mean, it's like a joke. Do you think that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck fucking Schumer are going to lead the party into a new populist era? Come on. Hakeem Jeffries might be the one Democrat who hates progressives more than Nancy Pelosi. As Maurice Mitchell put it, it just doesn't pass the smell test. So they can say that they're more pro-working class and they can get somebody to pretend to be anti-establishment like Bernie Sanders. But fundamentally, if you don't change the material conditions that's leading to this dissatisfaction with the system, you are still not going to be a party that can win elections. Maybe you'll win every 4 to 8 years, but we're going to go back and forth because neither party is going to systemically make changes that actually affect working class people in a positive way. But even if Democrats don't actually want to embrace real working class populism, it would behoove them, at a minimum, to at least not be antagonistic towards their own base. I feel like that's politics 101, but nonetheless, you do have to say it. And some of the things that they do feels like a real slap in the face to their most loyal supporters. And Bernie's former campaign manager, Faz Shakir, is going to give some examples of where Kamala went wrong.
You make a decision to say, I want to go stand with Mark Cuban. I want him to tell everybody about economic policy. You stand with Liz Cheney. I want to speak to Haley voters. You say, hey, I want to step back from capital gains taxes. I don't want to animate fights against Big Pharma. I don't want to talk about fights that we're doing at the FTC. I can't comment on Lena Khan. These are choices. These are just choices that you make. Yeah. And when you make those choices, you should also see, like, hey, are we going to say anything about expanding Social Security? Are you going to say anything about raising the minimum wage? We have to fight with them internally and externally to try to move them on those questions. And while the Democratic Party is there, people are asking, what do you animate? What's your fights? What do you care about? What drives you? And on those questions, you know, it was a slog, and I felt like we didn't animate enough on the working class contrast with Donald Trump.
He's right. And Kamala's campaign is a microcosm of a broader issue with the party. Kamala is just an empty vessel for the Democratic Party's hollowness. Does anybody actually think that Kamala Harris has a real political ideology? I mean, she's flip-flopped on fracking, on immigration, on Medicare for all. Nobody actually believes that she believes everything. And the same is true for a lot of politicians. And I get that there are structural factors that are working against her. She had 100 days to run a campaign. She's a woman of color. These are things that are going to make it more difficult for her than the average Democratic Party politician who's a white male. But still, she is a representation of the Democratic Party that doesn't really have any real convictions. They just say what they think we want to hear based on polls and focus groups, but they don't have any real thoughts of their own. Kamala Harris is deeply intelligent, but yet she was afraid to do interviews half the time during the campaign because what if somebody asks the question that leads to her giving an unpopular answer? Well, embrace that. Embrace the chaos. Embrace debate. Embrace saying something wrong or saying something that's unpopular and lean into it. At least we know that that's your thought and not what a Democratic Party strategist told you to say. That's part of the problem. But they're not just uninterested in what their base wants. Collectively speaking, they're actively hostile towards their base. And that's kind of what Faz Shakir was getting at. They do things that are seen as antagonistic, whether they're trying to be or not. For example, Kamala Harris, she campaigned with Liz Cheney in a deep blue district in Pennsylvania. Why are you trying to win over Republicans, seemingly, in a deep blue district? We know this because The Lever did an interview with the Democrat from that district who was stunned by the hubris of this decision from the campaign. Why did you not bring out Tim Walz to talk to people? He is actually a very good orator who can speak to this frustration with the working class. Why was he hidden until the final couple of weeks in the campaign? You know, all of this stuff feels like a slap in the face. And it doesn't matter that Kamala Harris proposed certain policies like the child tax credit or a cap on corporate price gouging, because first and foremost, people need to hear you talk about that again and again if you actually want it to register. But also, people just don't care that much about policy. I hate to say that, but it's true. Americans base their votes largely on vibes. I mean, that's just the way that they vote. And if you don't even bother to listen to them, or if you do listen and resort back to scripted talking points every single time that we've heard a million times, the vibes will be bad. And since they vote on vibes, if you're not giving them good vibes, they're going to vote against you. Or I think most of them are just going to stay home, right? Voters will get the sense that you're inauthentic and don't really care. And Bernie Sanders tried to explain this on CNN.
The voters supported is a man who would never do any of what you just said. I mean, not even close.
Right. But what that man named Donald Trump did do is he said, I feel your pain. I know that you're hurting, and I have an explanation. Well, his explanation was bogus. You know, you see millions of people coming across the borders illegal. We have to strengthen the borders. That goes without saying, but that is not the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem right now is to have a small number of people on top who have enormous economic and political power. How, for example, can the Democrats not say, look, we got to get rid of the Citizens United? In this campaign, in the Republican Party, Democratic Party, billionaires exerted their power.
And to his point, imagine how powerful it would have been if Kamala Harris named names. Imagine if she said, health insurance companies are lobbying politicians against your rights. Their billionaire CEOs don't actually care about your health. It's why you're paying so much. It's why they're price gouging. They care about padding their own pockets. Elect me, and I'm going to fight these leeches. I'm going to get rid of them, and we're all going to have quality health care that is free at the point of service. Imagine if she named and shamed Wall Street executives, or she condemned billionaires like Mark Cuban instead of turning them into fucking surrogates, right? Imagine if she didn't have advisors from Uber, legal counsel to Uber in her ear, influencing her decisions, right? You can say it's unfair to have this expectation for Kamala and Democrats because Trump's surrogate was Elon Musk, the richest man in the world. And I get it. I agree with you. It is unfair. It's a double standard. But elections aren't about persuading Trump supporters to flip over or independents to flip over. It is about getting non-voters off their asses. Even Jen Psaki said this. The Democratic Party can't go after these mythical anti-Trump Republicans. They have to get people who left the Democratic Party. A lot of these people left after 2016 and left after 2020. Some of them didn't even come back. Some of them left after 2012 when Obama didn't do the change that he said he was going to do. Get those people back. That's what you have to do every single time. Every single election is going to come down to how many people Democrats get out. Republicans always have this fixed number of people that will vote for them every single time that you can't change. And so winning and losing is always going to hinge on if you can get out your base more so than the Republican Party did. The people who stood home were the ones that Kamala needed, not the moderate Republicans. And by now, after this strategy has backfired twice, Democrats have got to realize that it's a failure, and to continue to do it is evidence to us that they don't care about winning if they should continue to do that. But I guess it's going to depend. But we'll see if we have free and fair elections in 4 years, who they choose. But as refreshing as it is to see a conversation like this take place on the national stage, I do want you to understand that you shouldn't get your hopes up about the Democratic Party. Sure, it's cause for optimism, and that's good right now, but I don't think that they're going to change. Right? Capitalism is a system that is self-reinforcing. So this anti-establishment fervor isn't probably going to lead to systemic change. Instead, what's probably going to happen is the capitalists are going to co-opt and corporatize this anti-establishment fervor and pretend like they're also against the establishment. I mean, we're already kind of seeing this. This is what Trump and Elon Musk are doing. Trump is a billionaire that got in office and cut his taxes, and he just convinced people to vote for him because he cares about them. Elon Musk is on Twitter railing against elites all the time, even though he is the richest man on the planet. It is the height of irony, and millions of Americans are dumb enough to believe it. So this is why I say don't expect anything but the corporatization of anti-elitism and anti-establishment and pro-populist messaging, right? Because the system is going to adapt. In fact, this anti-elitism could actually prove to be pretty profitable. I mean, how much money do you think Amazon is going to make in profits just selling Che Guevara shirts and, selling the Communist Manifesto to people who feel radical in this moment? Pop culture is going to give us revolutionary imagery so we feel seen and remain satisfied. But I mean, it's just all in our imagination. It doesn't mean things are going to change. We might feel listened to, but it's not going to fundamentally change the system itself. I mean, we're kind of already seeing this, right? Look at the Civil War movie. Have you seen that? Look at how sanitized it was, where they didn't take a side and didn't tell us whether it was the right or the left who became authoritarian. I mean, you kind of have an idea, but it was a corporate version of a civil war. if you look at video games, Far Cry 5, for example, you are literally playing as a revolutionary guerrilla fighter. And one of the missions, I kid you not, was to take over the television signal, if I'm remembering correctly, capture that broadcast, and put a concert on TV to resist the dictator. How edgy. I mean, this is what we're going to see. The system will try to scratch that itch for us while reinforcing itself. So this is why I say, and we're getting way off track here, but this is why I say I expect a better actor from Democrats and not somebody like Bernie Sanders who actually cares about change. And even if you get somebody who is ideologically driven like Bernie Sanders, it doesn't mean they're going to be a good fighter. Bernie Sanders cares about people, that's for sure. But is he a good fighter? Not necessarily, because he didn't do enough to fight after Joe Biden, or to fight Joe Biden, I should say, back in 2020. In fact, he kind of rolled over and said Joe Biden was my friend. So you need a bunch of things, and lightning has to strike twice in the same spot, and it's just really difficult to get that. So that's why I'm saying be realistic about what to expect going forward, because it's nice to see this conversation take place, but to think that Democrats will actually change, I'm not holding my breath. You know, sure, it's nice to hear Chris Murphy tell us what we all figured out 10 years ago, but he's not going to do a damn thing to change. He could do it right now and prove me wrong. Most of the party isn't going to change either. In fact, Nancy Pelosi condemned Bernie Sanders' advice for Democrats, and I do want to play his response.
Well, as you know, your statement was met with some sharp reaction as well. This is what Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi had to say. Take a look. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
Bernie Sanders has not won. Let me, with all due respect, and I have a great deal of respect for him, for what he stands for, but I don't respect him saying that the Democratic Party has abandoned the working class families.
Senator, how do you respond to Nancy Pelosi?
Well, Nancy's a friend of mine, and we've worked together on many issues. But here is the reality. I have to say to Nancy, in the Senate in the last 2 years, we have not even brought forth legislation to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, despite the fact that some 20 million people in this country are working for less than $15 an hour. In America today, we have not brought, in the Senate, we have not brought to the floor the PRO Act to make it easier for workers to join unions. We're not talking about defined benefit pension plans so that our elderly can retire with security. We're not talking about lifting the cap on Social Security so that we can extend the solvency of Social Security and raise benefits. Bottom line, if you're an average working person out there, do you really think that the Democratic Party is going to the mats, taking on powerful special interests and fighting for you? I think the overwhelming answer is no, and that is what has got to change.
And he is exactly right. The ship has sailed, and the trust is just gone, and no amount of introspection is going to reverse how cooked the party is at this point. But think about what he's saying here. Why don't Democrats talk about these things? It's always Republicans who are driving the news and creating the narrative. We have to defend trans people and talk about trans rights because Republicans won't stop demonizing trans rights and attacking trans rights. We're forced to talk about immigration because Republicans have decided that they're the cause of all of our problems. Why don't Democrats even try to counter message, or better yet, try to shape the national agenda themselves so that way we're talking about things on our terms and not on the terms of the right? Why have Democrats let Republicans turn immigrants into the common enemy when the real enemy is billionaires? They're the ones who are our common enemy. We should all be going after them. And to be clear, these are rhetorical questions. Like, I know the answers to these questions. Nancy Pelosi doesn't care that you're living paycheck to paycheck because she's in office making millions and millions of dollars from insider trading. She doesn't care about you. None of them do. Maybe a handful of politicians actually care. So Democrats can talk a big game right now all they want, but until they actually start walking the walk and they purge party leadership of these dinosaurs who are killing the party. It doesn't matter if Hakeem Jeffries is 30 years younger than Nancy Pelosi, right? It's change on the outside, continuity on the inside. We need somebody with a different ideology than the old guard. If the new guard is the same, then it doesn't really make a difference, materially speaking, or meaningfully, right? So purge party leadership, fire every single consultant, literally all of them, and be antagonistic towards the rich. If they don't do that, then don't expect systemic change. Don't expect a change from the party. But I think the best that we'll get is a change in rhetoric from a politician who's just better at faking concern for working class people. But real representation, it just doesn't seem possible in our late stage capitalist system, unfortunately. But I would be happy to be proven wrong. But I'm so cynical because this party at every step of the way has told us to fuck off. And so to see them now, after so many election cycles, tell us, oh, actually, maybe you were right. Okay, that's cool and all, but don't tell me, show me.